I'm joined by two political correspondents who have been covering this scandal alongside us. We've relied on some of their reporting and certainly their perspective. On screen right, Jeff Shapiro is the politics columnist for the Richmond Times-Dispatch and has been covering politics in the Commonwealth for almost 40 years. And Jake Burns is a reporter for our Richmond affiliate WTVR CBS 6. We could not tell this story without the assistance of CBS 6, so we're thrilled, Jake, that you're here. Guys, we've seen yet another turn today. We anticipated that Monday would begin with an introduction of articles of impeachment by a delegate from Northern Virginia who saw the news Friday about a second accuser against the lieutenant governor, and then today seemed to come to Richmond and realize, oh, wait a second, I'm a legislator. I don't get to do this by myself. We have to hold meetings and other planning sessions before we figure out exactly whether or not we can try to impeach the lieutenant governor. I'm just curious what you guys make, Jeff, we could start with you, of this latest turn. And if this essentially buys the lieutenant governor some more time.
Delegate Hope didn't have support within his own Democratic caucus, and there was clearly a considerable concern among Republicans as well. This has never been done before. If one reads the papers, it appears the last time that the General Assembly sat to impeach an elected official, actually it was elected by the General Assembly, it would have been a judge. So this is terra incognita. But it is also a reminder that this story is moving very quickly, and often many of the steps that are being taken are not necessarily fully informed steps.
Right. And Jake, I mean, part of what was fascinating is we spent most of last week running into lawmakers who agreed that all three of these guys, the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, either had to go or were on watch. But then that poll came out over the weekend from the Washington Post suggesting that the Commonwealth is actually somewhat evenly split, and African Americans think the governor deserves a second shot. I'm curious, did you today sense the same level of, oh, maybe we got this wrong, that we did among some of these legislators?
Well, there definitely was that rush right off the bat to call for Governor Northam and also eventually Lieutenant Governor Fairfax to step aside. Then you see this poll come out, and I think what you mentioned with the people you spoke with here in Virginia is an important point as well. We've been speaking with folks on the street now for several days, and they tell us much of the same thing, which is about half the people think he needs to step down, Governor Northam that is. The other half say that he should be forgiven and should be given the opportunity to clear his name and maybe do some good for this Commonwealth. So I think those numbers are very interesting to see, putting data to what we have heard from people out on the streets since this scandal broke a couple Fridays ago.
And there's a generational element here as well, talking, for example, with younger African Americans who perhaps feel more strongly about the need for change at the highest levels of the government versus older African Americans who are prepared to give Northam another chance. To your point about the poll, nearly 60% of African Americans may be supporting Northam, but he was elected with about 90% of the African American vote.
And we talked about this last week, Jeff, the fact that the state, former seat of the Confederacy, definitely part of the Deep South, and Ruby Red Republican for quite some time, has spent much of the past 10 years really evolving politically and demographically. And I think there's a sense among people who are maybe track politics at a national level outside of Virginia in recent years that this is a Democratic state. But as you reminded me last week, and as I think that poll reflects, there's an understanding here that there's a pretty complex history, and that what we've seen just in the last 10 years is quite dramatic compared to most of Virginia's history.
Yeah, this is not your father's or your grandfather's Virginia. As I think we discussed last week, the majority of people who live here are from somewhere else. This is truly a multi-hued Virginia. When I landed here in 1979, one was either African American, Caucasian, with a smattering of Native Americans. Now we have 30% of the population minority, and that includes Asians and Latinos, each roughly 6 to 8% of the population. Their presence was negligible 40 years ago.
We have elections in this state later this year. That's part of what makes this so tricky. We have elections every year in this state, right?
Every year in Virginia.
That is part of what is making this so difficult for Democrats. Remind us of how tick-tock tight the balance of power is in these two chambers, and what it is Democrats are hoping to do later this year.
Heading into this year, it was a 2-seat margin in both chambers, in the Senate and in the House of Delegates. And Democrats were really hoping after 2017, that election that many called a blue wave here in Virginia, where they really closed the margin, especially in the House, that they had an opportunity to take over both chambers and also have a Democratic governor sitting in the executive mansion. That would have been a game changer for Democrats in the state, as Jeff knows so well, and many people who follow this in Virginia as well. They were thinking this election in 2019 was going to be huge for the Democratic Party here in Virginia and could be a game changer for everyone here at the Capitol. What remains to be seen at this point is come November what this scandal, first of all, what's going to happen with it, and secondly, what voters will think about it when they finally head to the polls.
Yeah, and the added complexity is these are legislative elections. They are hyper-local. They tend to be friends and neighbors affairs with very, very low turnouts. Even in the bluest areas of the state, the Democrats need to get out every vote and then some.
I'm just curious as we wrap up, this is a state that's had scandal before. Most recently it was Bob McDonnell, the former governor, but that was mostly over an overpriced refrigerator, not anything on the scale of what we've seen in the last few days. What do your colleagues in Virginia press, your friends and neighbors here in town make of the national attention that this has drawn, and the fact that it wasn't 1, 2, but 3 of these at the same time?
You know, I spoke with someone on the street the other day that said they were getting calls from their friends across the country saying, what is going on in Virginia and who is going to be leading your state as we move forward? I think that speaks just to what, how big this has gotten. And, you know, the McDonnell controversy and his trial was definitely a big national headline, but it's nothing like what we see here, where everyone in the country is looking at every single twist and turn that happens with this scandal. And it's interesting to see how Virginians react. Obviously, it's very dependent on the person and the voter and the lawmaker that we're speaking with, but just in general, it's inescapable here at Capitol Square and really anywhere here in Richmond.
And this accelerant of nonstop news and social media, and to the point of social media, someone who's far more clever than I could possibly be observed on Twitter, that things are so bad in Virginia that now West Virginia would like to be known as East Kentucky.
We'll leave it at that. Jeff Shapiro with the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Jake Burns with WTVR CBS 6 here in Richmond. Thank you both for joining us. We appreciate it.